Hi everyone, good morning, good afternoon. We're going to get started shortly. So we give it another few seconds. Hope everyone is well.
Hello.
Hello everyone.
Just going to wait for a few more people to join and then we will get started. Okay, I think we'll kick off. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today around hiring without bias. We're going to be talking about practical steps to inclusive recruitment today. My name is Khadija Lewis. I'm a senior consultant at The Clear Company. I'm going to hand over to my colleagues shortly for a quick introduction, but I just wanted to welcome you to the session before we get started. You might notice today that you're on listen-only mode, so you won't be able to interact with us as speakers, but we can absolutely see your questions. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A box. If you have any questions based on the conversation today, please pop them into the Q&A box, and we will come to them at the end of the webinar. If we don't manage to get around to them today, one of our team will be in touch to discuss and we can answer your question one-on-one. And if you have any further questions, please feel free to ask that during the follow-up questions and conversations as well. I'm going to hand over to my colleagues, James and Maria now, and we look forward to having this conversation with you. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thanks,
Khadija. Well, should I start, James?
Yes,
then I'll pass it over to you. So, hi everyone, my name is Maria. I'm a managing consultant at The Clear Company. I've been in the D&I industry for 8 years now, working across the globe and across different industries. And I work very closely to James in our inclusive hiring, product learning, solutions, audit solutions and everything. So I will be here almost interviewing James today and giving him the room to showcase his expertise. So James, do you want to introduce yourself now?
Yeah, thank you, Maria. And I think you're being very kind there. So yeah, I'm James. I am a facilitator and consultant at The Clear Company, and I specialize in inclusive hiring. Inclusive hiring, we sometimes call it the evidence-based approach. We also talk about search, so we're going to bring as much of that today as possible. Before I even say anything myself, though, we wanted to start off and really get you thinking by showing you this video. So, oh, sorry, one second, make sure I'm showing with sound. I'm going to share a video with you now to show you how quickly bias can enter an interview. And do let me know your thoughts whilst this video is playing in the chat.
Hi, Alex.
Hi, Claire.
How are you doing?
Thank you. Doing great. And you?
Yeah, really well, thank you. We're just waiting for my colleague James to join us. He should be here in the next couple of minutes or so. How was your weekend?
Yeah, thanks. I had a great weekend. It's been such a nice weather, so really spent time with kind of friends and family. And then I went out on Saturday. I was actually not too far from your offices, so which is so very easy for me to have access to.
Okay, that's brilliant. Did you do anything fun with friends?
Yeah, so we had a nice barbecue first during the day, and then we went out in the evening, like in the area, just relaxing, having a good time. So a few drinks. So it was a really nice weekend. So we wanted to make the most of the nice weather. But what about you? How was your weekend?
Yeah, good, thank you. I played some tennis with some friends. We've got nice weather here in the UK as well. So yeah, it was lovely, thank you.
Well, I used to play tennis a lot at a competitive level. Like for 10 years, I've played tennis. So it's really like a huge passion of mine. So
brilliant.
Great to hear you're playing.
I'm certainly not professional level, but yes, it's very enjoyable. So that's great to hear. So how was your weekend?
Yeah, it was okay. Yeah, thanks.
Good. Did you get up to anything fun?
Sure, I can't remember. I'm sorry, I'm a bit nervous. Yeah.
Okay. Did the video freeze for anyone there? Maria, could you hear that video?
Yes, I could hear it. The image was frozen for a bit, but we could definitely hear everything. And I think you can tell a lot just by the way that they talk to each other, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's enough for bias to creep in a way.
Yeah, thank you. And Maria, do let me know your thoughts on that. I mean, the purpose of that video, and apologies if it froze for anyone, was really just to say that completely innocently, you know, our colleagues there, the first interview, you can see that just that tiny bit of small talk created a huge amount of rapport. And then I think this is maybe the bit that where the freeze happened. Then when we switched to another candidate who was nervous, who maybe didn't feel as comfortable with the small talk, really sort of didn't give an answer that hooked the interviewer. She wasn't talking about tennis or going out near the office. And the reason we show that is just to illustrate how bias can instantly come in. You know, we're going to talk about bias throughout this, but bias is unconscious, right? It makes us human. It's part of how our brains work. But even something as simple as, oh, sorry, my colleague hasn't arrived yet. How are you doing? What have you been up to? Can already create real comfort for one candidate who actually benefited from being like the interviewer, and a really awkward situation for the other candidate. Anything you'd add on, Maria, or any further questions you have on that one?
No, nothing to add. I think, as you said, James, you know, we really want to start the conversation today by thinking how we could use structure to mitigate biases in recruitment and what we can put in place to mitigate biases as we've seen in the video. So I think that conveys it really well, how bias can emerge just within seconds, isn't it? Depending on how you open an interview.
Yeah, and I think for us, the key thing there is, for some candidates, the informal conversational approach. How are you? You know, oh, do you know this person? You know, oh, you used to work here. You know, that for some candidates is going to be great. But for a lot of candidates, and obviously we're particularly interested in underrepresented candidates, I think that actually can create a lot of anxiety and not have that benefit. Mm-hmm. So that's why we really wanted to sort of kick off there before we then really go into detail with that evidence-based approach.
Yeah, that's a really good point, James. So I think the takeaway for this kind of first third of our time together is that inclusive recruitment really starts with recognizing how quickly bias can creep in and then designing process to counteract it. So replacing bias-prone moments with structured, evidence-based processes. And to kickstart this conversation, James, you brought a job description for us to discuss live, didn't you?
Yes. So I will start sharing that now. So thank you to those in the Q&A that were telling me, you know, what you can and can't see. Let me know in that button. And just to answer your question, we will be sharing the recording. So can people let me know if they can see this? I'm going to be scrolling down. Fab. Thanks, Maria. And I know Khadija and Maria, you can keep an eye on the Q&A if anything.
Yes.
So I've got a job advert here, and I'm going to be candid with you. This is a real job advert, and I did make it a little bit worse. You know, I did sort of make it a bit more dramatic just to really illustrate that point. So, oh, actually, I'm going to, if it's okay, before I go into this, I'm going to answer some of the questions coming from the chat. So, what should the interviewer have done instead of small talk is one question, and how could you put someone in ease? So, the easiest thing to have avoided that situation would have been for Claire as the interviewer to wait for this James candidate, you know, maybe literally me, to actually be there, to have avoided that moment, you know, so that rather than having this kind of 2 minutes where you're all sort of awkwardly moving around together, you know, you start off and the interview starts and you give a really confident introduction to the interview. The issue, I think, in that situation is the awkwardness of, well, where's the other person? We need to fill a minute. How am I going to fill it? Well, in the absence of something else, I'm going to have to fill it with probably bias talk, you know, because it's impossible in that moment, that kind of getting to know you, to not give away something that could create that. So it's just a really immediate version of that. You need structure, you need organization. Otherwise, you're going to create these awkward moments where bias will enter the chat. So I think for me, how do we put people at ease? Well, actually, I did an interview last week, and it's about saying, hi, just straight away, just want to tell you how this interview is going to work. It's going to be evidence-based. We're going to have a more informal chat afterwards, but we want to make sure this is as clear and unbiased as possible. So I'm going to introduce the role and we'll go straight into the questions. So I hope that answers your question. So I'm going to talk about this job advert now. And like I say, this is a sort of slightly exaggerated, but Maria will agree with me, and I'm sure Khadija offline as well. We've seen stuff that's very similar to this.
Mm-hmm.
I really like the structure of this job advert, but in particular, the language choices and some of the things they've done technically, I think, will create bias and will put some people off from applying. So right at the top, we've got job title, admin hero, and I don't know if anyone feel free to disagree with me in the Q&A, but for me, we see sometimes these attempts to make role titles maybe cute or a bit informal or a bit fun. I think there's a risk it can come across as patronizing, maybe a little bit cringy, but most importantly, I think it makes it unclear. So if you are doing, for example, a job search with keywords, you're not going to find this role. Or you might see this and you're not going to be aware of whether you're at the level or not. So although I think that this is an attempt to make the company seem fun, to make the role seem important, instantly I see, language that potentially could be confusing or alienating. And our recommendation would just be really clear with what the job title is. Then going into the main purpose of the role, before I maybe pause, Maria, for your reaction as well. Excuse me. I really like having this section here. And I think, again, they've attempted to make this, as personable and as real as possible. So this role is the lifeblood of the team, an essential cog in the wider machine. I think it's the right decision to make the role seem important and to emphasize that. But there's very colloquial language here. Lifeblood, cog in the machine, again, I think it's unclear potentially what's been trying to communicate. Swiss Army knife, fix-all superstar, this role does a bit of everything. This could appeal to somebody, but what I think it could equally do is be confusing, particularly if English is a second language, maybe for some types of neurodivergence. What we actually want here is clarity.
Mm-hmm.
The role is full-time and office-based. I just want to be super clear that if a role is full-time and office-based, that's fine. It's not for the clear company to say, don't do that. But what we always question is that actually the reality? And are you being as competitive as possible? Because if you put that down, you will lose candidates. Maria and I work very closely with some manufacturing clients. They work on a production line. Those roles are full-time and site-based. But when you have a role that doesn't need to be, or maybe actually isn't for other people in the team, just be mindful of why that's in. And I like this suggestion here. Well, our office is awesome, because actually having a great office is a benefit for a lot of staff. But again, the lack of clarity or lack of flexibility, I think, is an issue. You'll be responsible for the admin created, and all of this stuff. Maybe that's okay. But again, to this line here, and I know Khadija was cringing at this one, in our gang, we always do a bit of extra stuff, expect some ad hoc responsibilities. Again, I'm worried that's unclear. What does that actually look like? I think it's always worth giving that caveat that there may be some moments where you have to do things outside of your role. But again, be more descriptive, more professional. What would your thoughts be, Maria?
I agree with you. The job advert in a way is the beginning of the candidate experience. Yeah. So a good amount of the point of a job advert is for the candidate to read it and say, I can do this job well, or there's parts of this job that I'll have to learn. I would love to do this job, or I actually don't think this job is for me. So, a quality job advert saves everyone's time, in a way, isn't it? And that's why I think, James, you keep talking about clarity.
Yeah.
Because if a candidate reads a job advert like this one, it's just very unclear what do they actually need to know to be able to do this job, and what are the responsibilities really.
And And
Yeah.
some of this stuff about like, this is what we're like as a company, I think maybe that can come at the end, or that could maybe be on the website. But you're absolutely right. When we say the main purpose of the role, I'm almost learning more about the way this company talks, the way that they express themselves, rather than what the role actually is. And that uncertainty is going to create anxiety for certain candidates. We might lose good candidates because they don't really get this particular tone. And we've gone for this sort of playful, informal tone. Equally, I've seen very rigid, very, you will be working full-time and office-based, and there are always additional hours, and this is a very important, and actually it's off-putting because it's clearly a role that's going to take up your entire life. There are lots of different ways we can do this. But actually here, this is what the role does as part of the team. This is the business function. So next thing I wanted to show you, some of this I think again is done pretty well. So we really like having key responsibilities on the advert. I think organizations need to take time and effort to really understand what a role is and be willing to describe that. So I think this is good, and then it gets progressively worse. Ownership of admin processes, long admin tasks, maybe these could be better written. But as we go down, we start to see things which I would say are less key responsibilities of the role and maybe informal expectations. So greeting people at reception, note taking. And then we get into stuff that, aren't really responsibilities at all. So a great attitude, willingness to learn, manage database, maybe that's actually quite a good one again. But it's this inconsistency. So one of our suggestions is a maximum, I would say, of 5 key responsibilities, because the key responsibilities within them will have a lot of tasks that fit below them. Does that make sense, Maria? What would your thoughts be on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, linking back to our kind of overarching conversation around hiring biases, the key responsibilities, if they're well written and well structured and they really mirror what the job requires, they will be your best ally in framing the rest of the process, because you know what you're looking for. So, for example, owning project budgets, that is a skill that you can measure and you can try and find in candidates. A great attitude, very biased. It could very easily get into enthusiasm for competence, couldn't it, James? Or like me bias, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think that what I always say here is your key responsibilities effectively can be used as your sifting criteria when you're looking through CVs or applications. So if I go, right, full ownership of admin process, can I prove that I've done that? Yes or no? I can. I've got it in my CV. Then I look at, okay, present project updates to wider business. Yes, I've done that. That's there in my CV. Willingness to learn, great attitude,
Yeah.
at reception. Is that going to be there in my CV? Are you going to sift me in or out based on that? So I think that if we get this criteria right and we have maybe 5 really clear responsibilities for the role, and we do a sifting process, we will lose candidates, but we'll be losing them because they don't have relevant experience for the role, and that's a good thing. So Maria and I had a client where it was really interesting that the admin role actually involved quite a lot of presentations. And I think in some ways, for some candidates, that was off-putting, but they wanted to lose those candidates. They wanted candidates that were good at admin and good at presentations. So that's criteria working well. What they don't want to do is lose people who go, well, I don't know what a great attitude means. So, I'm off-put from this process.
James, if I can just add something to what you were just saying, I think, we hear a lot about inclusive language in recruitment. And for example, we've been talking a lot over the last maybe 10 years about, for example, gender neutral CVs, etc., which is really important. But I think it's also really important to think that inclusive language in a job description is clear language.
Yeah.
Providing clarity is the most inclusive thing that you can do. So being really clear on these are the key responsibilities, and James will talk now about criteria, but really focusing on what's really key and what's really needed. That's the most inclusive thing, isn't it, James?
Exactly that. This is not about we want to bring in candidates who can't do the role or anything like that. The real negative you might hear about inclusive hiring, that false perception. It's about saying, actually, let's forefront ability to do the role, you know, and I think particularly here, key responsibilities is experience of. So if we treat the key responsibilities as experience of, and I sift CVs using this criteria or applications, then I'd be looking at key skills and experience required. And then I would be using this, you know, as a way of then writing some interview questions. So this candidate must have an ability to do focused admin tasks, experience of project management, including methodology, presentation and communication skills, Excel skills. You know, all of this is something that I can test against. So I think having this in there is going to help me go from experience of to ability to, and in particular, ability to, you know, at the standard I need. Then we've got some more horrible stuff here. So the Clear Company recommends that you never include desirable criteria, because desirable criteria is often when we start to informally describe the kind of person that we want. A qualification of any kind. Well, if I don't have a qualification of any kind, am I going to apply? Well, no, it's only desirable. But again, I'm being told this is what you need. Track record of excellence. What does that mean? You know, without that detail, without really going into detail, what could that mean? A fighting spirit, process, all the processes we use. Well, I don't even know what those are. And last but not least, and we'll end on this one, but this line of a good culture fit. So culture fit is often discussed in inclusive hiring or evidence-based hiring. There is a way to get this right, but at its worst, culture fit and probably all of these can be used as an excuse to not hire you because we don't like you or because we don't think that you're the right fit for us rather than skills. So I think sticking to assessment based on things that we can actually measure and track and gain evidence of, I would say that this is what I'm going to use now to assess ability to. And I'm going to stop the sharing there.
Well, James, thank you so much for sharing that. I think there's so much to discuss around how to create, you know, very strong job adverts. But I think the main takeaway here is, you know, really use job descriptions to gather useful evidence. They will be the basis for the rest of your recruitment process, and you know, the job advert will ensure that you and the candidate are on the same page, and you can create consistency throughout the process. So. Yeah. James, bearing in mind everything that we've seen today around how biases can creep in, you know, the whole recruitment process, what practical changes can you use to reduce biases in shortlisting, interviews, and decision making?
Yeah, love that. And I think there's a great question in the chat as well. So, Maria, do you mind if I go to that question first?
Absolutely.
So there's a question here. Can you provide tips on how to assess culture fit? It's the reason used most often by hiring managers. So I can give you an example, and we are able to talk about our partnership with Lloyd's of London. You know, we have a public partnership with them. They spend time, effort, money on defining some really clear organizational values and then crafting culture-based questions off the back of those. So what I would always say is culture fit is okay if it's based on something that doesn't have, you know, inherently discriminatory things in it. So, for example, Maria and I, Khadija, we work very independently. You know, we work for a consultancy. We're not office based. So our culture is to be individually accountable. You know, to take personal responsibility. Lloyd's have things like being inclusive or being, you know, innovative as part of their culture. If you've got stuff that's well defined like that, then you can assess against that. You can ask questions about that, and you can have model answers, which is what I'm going to come on to talk about. But if your culture fit is ill-defined, then it's whatever's in the hiring manager's head, and that's when it's biased, right?
Absolutely.
And that's when it can end up being stuff like you don't support the right sport, or you have the wrong hobbies, you know, which is what we saw in that.
Or you're wearing the wrong outfit. We've seen very often as well.
Yeah, so I think there's a great question come in here. Years ago, we had a session with a branding consultant, company behaviors and values. We've always included these in the job advert. These bring more bias. Well, I think it goes back to the point I was making there, that if they are things that you are confident are not going to have, we talk about adverse impact. So if we say, you know, for example, a slick presentation style, that could have a bias against a certain type of accent or a certain type of presentations. But if you say something like ability to communicate with stakeholders, then I would say that that has kind of been scanned for adverse impact and is something more meaningful. So yeah, we can talk about that one more offline if you'd like, but I think it's all going to be about, how detailed the explanation is of those values. Maria, apologies, you asked me another question. Maybe let's go back to that.
I did, but it links to everything that we were saying, which is what practical changes can you use to reduce bias throughout the hiring process?
Yeah, look, this is not an easy thing to do, but it is about setting up a process, and it is about organizations having the courage, and it often has to come from the recruitment team or the talent team, however you put it together, HR, with a contribution, but not necessarily led by the DEI team, to actually interview differently. Because we can individually reduce our bias, but it is actually through consistent and fair use of process that we're going to make those changes. So very simply, and this is a huge question done in a minute, but very simply, having an evidence-based approach. So you have a job advert that follows a particular template that follows those tips we did. You then use that for shortlisting. You then ask every candidate the same question, same set of questions in the same order, and you should have some model answers that are predefined and a pre-agreed way of marking against those model answers. So if Maria and I interview together, we've already agreed in advance what the criteria is, how we do the marking, what the model answer is. And then if we meet a candidate, it doesn't matter if Maria likes them and I hate them, we mark based on the answers, we mark based on the criteria. I'm going to answer this question that came in the chat. So, is anonymous presentation of candidates or AI interviews recommended for more inclusive hiring? It's a great question. Our feeling has always been that anonymizing at any stage is only going to delay the bias. At some point, we are going to work out who this candidate is. So if we have a bias because of their gender or their ethnicity or something like that, at some point it's going to factor into our thinking. So it's much better actually to shift, rather than to say, let's anonymize this bias. We almost said, well, instead of trying to prevent that, let's replace it with this evidence-based approach instead. So I think anonymizing CVs might stop that, but actually we think the most powerful thing you can do is, have this process in place. What I would say, though, is being mindful about passing on information about protected characteristics is important not to do. So, I wouldn't be saying you've got 3 female candidates, you've got all of these things, that kind of stuff. And Maria, with your permission, I'll go to this great question here. So again, we're a bakery, so we do trial shifts rather than a sit-down interview. How can we assess practical skills inclusively? Very much the same principle, and I love this question, and Maria and I really like working with non-office based candidates as well, non-office based clients. It's exactly the same, but your model answer will be much more based on observable behavior, right? So I'm going off grid here, so do give me feedback on this, but it would be stuff like is aware of hygiene, asks good questions, gets on with it, shows it will be about predefining the kind of things you're looking for, rather than watching them do this trial shift and then afterwards being like, oh yeah, classic, great candidate, did it just like I would. I still think it's about how can you put that stuff in advance about what you're looking for, in detail, consolidated by several managers, several people in the organization, and then you assess against that. And that would also apply to any technical question that you ask. Yeah,
absolutely. If I can just add one more thing really quickly is we are very much fans of work samples and trial shifts when skills are really practical. Much better than ask someone, can you make bread, is getting them to actually make bread, right? Because you could just answer, yes, of course I do, especially if you're a very confident candidate. I think what James said, that is just really knowing what you're looking for and making that standardized is the golden the golden path, I think. Yeah, that's me. Khadija, are we due? Are we
Yeah,
done?
we're doing
wrapping
great for time. I was wanted to jump in to thank you both for that great conversation and those kind of great takeaways that you shared throughout this session. I hope it's been useful for everyone in the audience. We've probably got time for one very quick question. So I'm going to ask you the question and then ask for your kind of top tip. So the question is, how do you engage hiring managers who see structured interviews and scoring as too time intensive? So what would be the biggest tip?
I know we've got a minute left, but this is such a great question to end on. So there's two stats that I always use here. The cost of a bad hire can exceed the salary of the role by 4 to 6 times. That's all the recruitment costs again. That's having the wrong person in the wrong role, losing business, all of these things. So the evidence-based approach replaces this sort of instinctive, yeah, they feel good, they look, that I'm vibing with them, I like them. It replaces that with, I am certain that this person has the relevant experience and skills. So that's a massive thing. The leading factor for ineffective hiring, so the main cause of it, according to a survey done in the Harvard Business Review, is ineffective skills match. And I always say this, that culture fit is important, personality matters, but if you can't do the job, eventually the personality is not going to help, and you might go, oh, I don't like that person. But if they're fantastic at your job and they're respectful and they fit in with your values, you'll be surprised that you actually then start getting on with them. So I think that's the way I get hiring managers in. It's more work up front, but you're still using your expertise. It's just you're putting it into a process that's proven, and it ultimately is more time effective than having bad candidates.
Yeah, I think those are really good points. I would just add that we see very often organizations that don't have a very structured hiring process and they do 4 or 5 interviews for each candidate. If you follow an evidence-based process, you only really need 1 interview, because then you have the transcript from the interview and it's evidence-based, and you can just read the transcript and you know what was talked about and what the person can actually do. Of course, some of our clients still do a follow-up interview, but you go from 5, 6 interviews to 2.
Yeah.
And that is very time and money saving as well.
Great answer. Thank you so much. I know we've gone over slightly, but thank you everyone for your time and for joining us today. And thank you so much, Maria and James, for leading.
Thank you.
And we look forward to seeing you in the next webinar. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.